Hey, welcome again to the LowCode Podcast. Today we have David Adkin. He's the founder and CEO of Adalo, one of the, I don't want to say old no-code platforms, but they've been around for a while compared to a lot of newer ones. So David, welcome. It's great to have you here with us.
Yeah, thanks. It's crazy that
we call
there are some now old I'm going to call them OGs, originals, right. But I don't know, that probably gets into a whole nother debate. There was no code before no code, yes. All that. There was actually OG no code before us. So happy to get into any of those topics during this as well. Right. But fun time. Really excited to talk with everybody. I just care the most about people creating new things with no code or low code or whatever they're going to choose to do it that best enables them. That's what I'm been really passionate and excited to talk to you all about.
So let's start there with the history of no code. How did you find no code, and why did you end up deciding to build a no code app builder?
Yeah, that's right. So for me, I was, I guess, you described, we were around before the word no code, was even a thing. So I was a product designer, UX designer before this. I was working at a different startup for quite a while, another great SaaS company. I was doing mockups every single week. And I think I was in that era, like the sweet spot of prototyping where everything really blossomed. So if you think back, I don't know, depending on who's listening to this. So I guess this was like 2010-ish, there was mainly front-end engineers doing the design work. Actually, there was not, at some companies there were UX designers dedicated, but primarily that was kind of a new thing where I was like, wait a second, we're gonna have a brand new role. You're not actually going to know how to code. All you're gonna do is produce mockups. And I was one of the first, kind of in that era. Actually, I came from architecture beforehand, so jumped ship there and into this brand new field of UX design. So I was in in that era, the tools progressed really fast. So I started using Balsamiq at the very beginning. I don't know. Some people may or may not know that. Now it's used for very different use cases. But at the time, that was like the most beautiful way that you were presenting mockups was through Balsamiq. Okay. And then for anyone who doesn't know, it's well, I guess maybe we would say ugly looking by today's standards. It's supposed to be very sketchy looking, if you will.
Yes.
And you couldn't really get pixel perfect things. That wasn't really the point. It was just like, hey, here's what this is going to look like. Really fast over the next 3 or 4 years, it went from, hey, there's a new thing called Sketch. And you're like, oh, cool. So you start working in Sketch, and then in Vision, and it's like, oh, we're bringing this thing to life. And then tools like UXPin came out, and Figma came out, and it really kind of exploded really quickly, and everything started to look more and more realistic. And you started to put, as a product designer, UX designer, you started to put a much more detail into what you were kind of handing off to the engineers. So much so that I remember actually fooling and tricking some of not on purpose, but tricking some people in the company, specifically on sales or marketing teams at the previous company I was at, into thinking like, oh, this is like, it's real, this is live. And it was like, no, like this is just David's fake, kind of mock-up of what it's going to look like. So I think that moment definitely had some kind of triggering effects for me. I was like, wait a second, this is getting, so realistic, between, where it just come a few years later. So that's one strand that's happening where it's getting more and more realistic. And then I did try to learn how to code. So I'm not I definitely, really empathize with all the no coders out here, because that is me, right? I don't know how to code. So I tried to learn for a little bit, took some courses, Treehouse, did all that kind of fun stuff. And I remember being up late one night, just thinking, by the time I get really good I'm definitely a perfectionist as a designer. I want things to be perfect. And I was like, by the time I feel really confident in this, somebody's just going to come up with a way for me to drag and drop and do it. So it was those kind of sparking moments back in 2018, where I was like, wait a second, why can't we just take the progression of design tools and make them into real things? So I definitely came at this from a much more design centric perspective. And a true kind of no coders perspective, I guess. So yeah, that's a little bit about how it was born.
And then you partnered with an engineer to build Adalo.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. I had a couple other co-founders. We came together. Obviously on the engineering side because I couldn't make it. But I definitely came at it from a design perspective and how the product should kind of look and feel from a true kind of no coders perspective, if you will, during that era. And then this was. This is like early 2019. Again, no code, the term is still not really quite there. At this point, people are kind of at least speaking it occasionally, but it's not really a movement quite yet. So during that era, before we had publicly launched, when we were just kind of like building Adalo, which was actually had a few different names before we landed on Adalo. But so when we were building that, I actually went out to startup events or local businesses, and I would say, hey, I can make an app for you. And I remember at the beginning that people were like, what do you mean you can make an app without coding? Like they were very much at that moment it was hard to even convince people that this was possible. I would say now it's like funny to look back. Everyone's like, well, you can just do this. Right. But at
it's only 3 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's only 3 years ago. But like you really did have to convince people. People were very skeptical. But some people didn't have, they were like, oh, whatever, it's not that much money. So we started, selling some individual apps where I would actually build it myself. And then when something didn't exist, like a feature in Adalo, I'd be like, hey, can we build that in? So then we would add in new features into the platform as I was going out and selling. So I definitely, to some extent, accidentally...
Has the client changed? Like, who did you build Adalo for originally? Who was the client? Is the client a different persona today than it was 3 years ago?
That's an interesting question. Yeah. So I do think as a whole, no code is now, I guess, in a little bit of like a glow up phase, if you will, where we are starting to move a little more and more to established businesses or small businesses, those types of things. It was definitely, at the time, I would say the easiest was the clients that, were aspiring startup founders, and they really didn't have any other choice but to go with us. They're like, well, yeah, I don't have a technical co-founder or
money,
$100,000. So yeah, I guess I'll spend a little bit of money to make an app, my MVP, type of a thing. Especially because platforms really hadn't even got to the point where you could even scale MVP. So it really was just kind of an MVP. Bubble hadn't raised 100 million and hadn't, really kind of ushered in that new era of like, no, you can make, legit funded startups on it. But so yeah, I think it was definitely a lot of startup founders, but there was still a lot of the same, local business apps that I would go out and I would say, hey, you realize that you could make this. I think maybe this gets into another topic, but of like who it's for and what, how no code and low code has changed and where it's headed. I think the biggest message and most important thing that's starting to change, but is really going to I think one of the biggest things for this to really kind of take off is the ability for businesses at any scale, existing businesses, to realize like what they can do with this. If you look back at, let's just go way back in time to it's 2000, right? At that point, none of the website builders, what we would call no-code website builders, had really launched yet. WordPress and Squarespace both launched in 2003. Really, you're just kind of like developers making websites for people. And businesses didn't really understand like what you were supposed to do with a website at that point. Like if you were to tell somebody, hey, you should have a website, they would go, oh, all right, like, cool. Like, I guess so, but don't we just have the yellow pages or, whatever? Like people will find us. Like, it's not really that important. Right. And obviously that's funny to say that, like thinking about today, it's like, well, yeah, every business needs a website. Like it's very obvious that every business needs a website today. And that wasn't the case. And then those kind of tools came out, you started having freelancers and agencies making websites for different businesses. And now those tools have matured so much. They're so easy that, now business employees and everyone makes websites, right? Much easier. So that kind of evolution happened where the key thing there though is that like you would start to see one business have a website and it was successful and you're like, oh, I should do that. Or, that message kind of spreads. That same thing is going to happen with no code and low code, where businesses are starting to realize like, wait a second, like I could build custom tools, software, whatever you want to call apps, whatever that word is. And I think the fact that the word is a little muddled is a little confusing now, but apps, tools, software, whatever it is, or even websites, because a web app is confusing to people outside of the, the tech space. Like, what is a web app? What's Twitter? Is that an app? A web app? I don't know. So like, whatever that terminology that you feel most comfortable with, but that idea, let's just go with app, that idea of custom apps for businesses hasn't really taken off yet.
Okay.
And in that people don't quite know what to do with them well enough to, I think, the amount of demand that will come, the same change is going to happen just like with websites, where people are going to look back, I think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and businesses are going to go like, wait a second, well, yeah, I have tons of custom apps all over the place doing things like this makes so much sense. But that shift for people outside of the no code space, or even outside of the tech space, where they understand that this is an option for them, hasn't quite taken root yet. And I think that is the largest kind of, I think aspect of society that has to change for no code to like really take off.
That's interesting. Does that mean that you think that businesses will end up choosing, because with websites, it's a little bit different. You have one website usually, like a WordPress website, and that's it. With no code, we're talking about custom apps. So you might have multiple custom apps for your inventory, for HR, whatever. Does that mean that, or do you think that businesses will end up choosing a platform, let's say Adalo, and then they'll build a bunch of apps using Adalo? Is that like the progression, you think? Or you think that they'll use Adalo for something and Bubble for something else and Webflow for their website? What do you think will happen in that sense?
No, I definitely think it will be a range of choices that happen. Okay. I do think, let's see. One thing, website builders, there are multiple of those that have been around. There's 11 website building unicorns right now in terms of valuation for people that can build websites and that type of stuff. So I do think that there will be a lot of, let's say, no code software builders in the future as well. I don't think Adalo is also not trying to be the one platform to rule them all type of a thing. I think you'll have different use cases.
Because I think that Bubble is trying to position themselves that way. Like you can do anything in Bubble, everything in Bubble. Like Glide's recent pricing change, like fixed price for unlimited apps, might be related to that as well, which I hadn't thought. Like use Glide for any type of thing that you might need internally. So there might be some platforms that look into that as a strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I think there'll be different use cases that you might use different things. I think there's some internal only kind of like dashboarding process stuff that I think you might use a different platform for. Depending on the size of your company, you might use different platforms, just like, smaller companies today tend to choose, Squarespace versus, larger tech companies are choosing Webflow. There's different choices that you might make dependent on the size and complexity of, what you're trying to solve. I do think there's so if you're trying to build, let's say there's another thing. So there's internal only apps, and then there's these other apps where it's an app that's interacting with your customers and clients in some way for that business. Let's say a fitness studio, and you're sending workouts back and forth to your clients, that type of a situation. And then there is another category where you're trying to make a tech product with no code or low code, be that, a venture-backed startup that's, scaling forever, or an actual SaaS product that you're trying to sell. In those cases, you only have external customers. You're selling that as the product. So that's kind of another subset. So I think you'll have different platforms be designed for those different use cases, or who's creating it, whether you're a high-end, very professional dev shop and you're using low code is very different than, if you're making an internal app at your, 50-person organization and you're just kind of making it yourself. Like, those are very different use cases. So I still think we will have, I believe we'll have multiple, no code and low code software building tools fit into some of those different subcategories.
And then in 5 years, where do you see Adalo in that space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think, we are trying to continue to be both simple and powerful to kind of fit into that, middle.
Because let me interrupt you for a second.
Sure, yeah.
In my opinion, I think that Adalo is a tool for people who are building consumer-facing apps that want to be in the App Store. So I see Adalo being mainly used, or most of the Adalo apps I've seen are consumer-facing apps in the App Store instead of internal apps. Is that still today's main client persona that uses Adalo?
Yeah, I think that's today. I think that's certainly the same thing. We do have a big Adalo 2.0 launch that will be coming up early next year for responsive web apps. That way, it won't necessarily just be, because I do agree right now, you can make web apps today on Adalo, but we don't really talk too much about it because you can't make them responsive design and all that kind of stuff. But our larger vision is certainly, you have one app and you can put it wherever you want to put it. So a true cross-platform app that is designed for all the different screen sizes. You just design it once, and wherever your end users want to be, they can get it. Some of your most loyal customers might want to get it from the App Store and have it on their phone. Some of this is my first time interacting with this business. I just want to log in through the web app, and I want it to look good in all the different screen sizes. In all those cases that I just explained, it's still external, if you will, in that sense. But I don't know. It's an external internal bridge, and maybe that's like a weird way of describing it. But you still have some parts of that process. So let's just go. Let me back up for a second. So. At the end of the day, like any piece of software is a process that you are making. It's a long, like, UX designers always call it like the user's journey, right? There's a user's journey that exists, and now you're making that a more pleasurable experience and probably automated in certain parts, right? So even if it's Uber, right? Like that previously was, I got to call up a taxi, I got to wait for them. I don't know if they're coming, there's a whole user journey there of you call, you wait, I don't know, like you got to pay afterwards. That's a pain point, like all of that stuff. There's, let's just say 40 steps on that user's journey. I don't know. It is depending on how much you pick. Could be less or fewer, but there's a whole journey there. And now it's turned into an app that made that a more, kind of pleasurable experience for all the different parties that were involved. The driver had a better experience. The rider had a better experience. The rider's friends had a better experience. All of those, there were different parties kind of involved, and there were different steps along that. So where I think Adalo is great for is, and I think no code in general, what I'm really excited about are those types of processes happen, at every community, at every organization, at every business, where you have something today that you are probably just using email back and forth, or docs back and forth, or spreadsheets, or maybe you're manually collecting some information on a form, or a form over here. If you take that user journey, it's a process that's back and forth. It probably involves now your customers or clients, but also probably involves you as like a staff, or that's why I say internal user,
app
like
owner, right.
Yeah, as the app owner. And, whether that's a scheduling thing or just to go back to that fitness example, just because I said it before, if that is you have the trainer and those are internal staff members. And previously they would have to send their workouts through email and back and forth through clients and, through docs and spreadsheets. And maybe they send them a video. It's very I think we'll look back 5 years from now and think of all of those types of processes as being just like the Yellow Pages was a little backwards, where you're like, oh, well, yeah, we have a website now. I think we'll look back and be like, oh, I was doing that very haphazardly through email and docs and spreadsheets and this very convoluted process that was well, why don't I just make, a custom app for that? So, but in that process, the roles that exist, there is sometimes some of them are internal and sometimes it's external, and there's interactions happen between those people. So that's why I say it's kind of internal, kind of external, for where I think Adalo's, best kind of position, just because you can make it into the App Store. So that inherently is external users or onto the web. And you can customize it to be your exact brand. So it does fit that look and feel, versus, hey, this is internal only. And, we just want it to look, professional, doesn't quite need to be our brand. And, we don't really care about the app stores because it's just an internal only thing. It's pretty simple in terms of the number of steps in that process that I think you're trying to simplify. That's, kind of a different subset of no code, low code app builders that I would talk about. Airtable is kind of jumping into that space, I would say. There's those types of things that are internal only, kind of, they're simple processes in the sense of it's probably 5 or 6 steps that you're trying to automate instead of the 40 steps that you're trying to automate from, or maybe automate parts of them or make them better experiences. Right. And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum where it's like a tech product and, you're selling a
user interface,
you're selling a SaaS product. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
To you need every last bell and whistle has to be. Yeah. You're competing against true code at that point, true development. Right. I think Bubble is certainly positioning themselves. And I think you had talked about that before. One platform. I think they're just trying to say, hey, you can do everything because you should make tech SaaS products on their platform. So that's a little bit about where we're definitely. I think a little more in the middle there in terms of, what we are, best suited for and where we're kind of headed.
Cool. Does that give you more clarity in terms of what new features are you working on? I think there's always this, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but it's challenging to decide what to do next. Your users are asking for certain things. Yeah. You might see an opportunity of, if we launch this feature, we may get more money, more paying users, less churn, whatever. That is hard. I think that is quite challenging. How do you define which features to launch or what features to work on?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and it's especially true, right? Because every single platform in the no code, low code space, there's so many features that we all, kind of need for the products to be great. I don't know if they'll ever be complete necessarily because it's just such a big problem set that you're tackling, compared to if you look at the spectrum, it's always going to be important to put it into place too, in terms of where all these platforms are in their maturity. If you look at any startup, let's go all the way to the farthest ends of the spectrum. An autonomous self-driving car takes so much capital and resources and time before you have your very first product that people would actually purchase a self-driving car. Almost billions of dollars, essentially. Maybe not that much, but a lot of money, right, to get that. On the opposite end of that tech spectrum, in terms of resources that you need, is probably actually the early days of, for example, something Instagram's much bigger now, but Instagram at the very beginning was post a photo and put one filter on it. Right.
True.
And it was actually done by I think it was 3 people before they were $1 billion company selling to Facebook, right? Because it was a much more simple product. Now, again, it's gotten more complicated because they're, bigger, but at its core, it was able to be successful with that small amount of time and resources, right? I think no code is somewhere in the middle of that. And that's important. And again, every single no code platform is important to acknowledge that. I know you called us at the beginning the old OG ones, but it still is, we're still all pretty early in our infancy in terms of the number of features that we still quite, all of us don't have all the features we would really want, I think, to make it, oh yeah, they've got everything. I don't really need anything. At some point, new features just kind of sweeten the pot. And at some point it's no, I still need some more things. I still feel all of our platforms are in that stage where you're just I want more. I know you want more and I want to give you more. So we're still kind of there. I think that's another reason why no code and low code hasn't totally revolutionized the whole world yet, because the platforms are still trying to add some of those, kind of core things to unlock all of that. So anyways, that's one way of saying every platform has way too many features that they wish they could immediately get to. I think it's important to, when you're thinking about it, recognize, how technical do you, are you trying to make that platform? Yeah. I know we, is this a low code platform or a no code platform? And I do think that's a different, I think they are, I know it's a spectrum and it's hard to tell, but I think whether when you call yourselves a low code platform, you're probably making more feature choices that are no, it's fine. This can be more technical. It doesn't need to be as simple for people to, use that feature who don't really know anything technical. And you're trying to probably make feature choices that, are set up for, that app to be more powerful or scale for whatever it's kind of going to be, versus, are you making a feature choice on the opposite of the spectrum that's just making this thing really, really simple. And I think we are kind of right. Again, we're always trying to be right in the middle there, just for where we think, we kind of fit in terms of, we have to think, okay, we want to do that feature, but, how can we
make it easy enough for?
Yeah, how can we make it easy enough? Exactly. Where Adalo is still simple enough to get started with, but you can get the customization you want. So that takes us time sometimes to make sure, we are striking that kind of balance and not just let's add a bunch of things, but then it's really hard to use. Those are some of our thoughts. Certainly, us being cross-platform has a lot of extra things that we have to kind of deal with. We do have that vision where you just make one app and put it wherever you want to put it. That hopefully should more come to life in the very beginning of next year when we launch Adalo 2.0. Depending on when you're listening to this podcast. So we have to think about, okay, how is this going to work natively? How is this going to work on the web? Those types of choices, are also, what we're thinking about there, as well. Those are some of our choices. I think another big subset, we haven't spoken about today, is probably exactly what you do, but there's a whole subset of freelancers and agencies, whether it's a one person, kind of just a freelancer, all the way up to 5 to 10 person, the little dev shop, whatever you want to call yourselves, no code agency, all the way up to, 100 person, this is a dev agency, highly professional, very much going after enterprise types of clients there, if you will. So, trying to make sure that we have features and things for that category is also really, really important to us right now. I think that businesses...
That was my next question. Do you cater to that target of freelancers and agencies building for businesses? Because I think, and I something that I see every day is a lot of no code and low code tools defining if they want to go direct to the client, to the small and medium businesses, to the entrepreneur, to the builder, or they like that channel, traditional channel setup, like very legacy like FileMaker and Microsoft products, that they have this channel partner, and the channel partner is the one who builds for clients. And it's a different. I think that today most no code tools haven't figured out that yet. Some of them are starting to make certain moves, like we're gonna go the channel route and have our partners and really strengthen them in order for them to bring us business. And a lot of other ones are like we want to go direct, and we want to make it as easy as possible for anyone to build their own app. And then maybe like they have partners just in case a large enterprise comes along or something. It's an interesting trade-off, especially with no-code tools. I think they haven't figured it out yet if they want to have both, or like who their target is.
Yeah. We're definitely a lot, as of recently, a lot more focused on freelancers and agencies and making it much easier for you all to, what do you all need? What can we build in there? That type of thing. I think it is interesting, though, what you're saying.
What is the best growth strategy for Adalo? Is it partners like freelancers and agencies, or is it direct? How do you get your customers?
Yeah. We want it to be like right now, for freelancers, agencies, we want that to. I'm not saying we don't want the other things as well. And I know there's you're saying like, well, what are you trying to pick? It is important that for us that if we make it too difficult, then no code won't have its ultimate kind of, aha, where, you actually have business employees just building it everywhere. So we don't want to push it too far where it gets too difficult, which can happen if you're just kind of focused, let's say, on very, very high end, agencies, right? And that type of a model. So we still want people, who want to build on their own, of course. But right now we are really focused on, okay, I think we had previously probably been, really, really focused on that. And now we're trying to say, okay, no, like, wait a second, these freelancers and agencies, you all are really help to push this movement forward. So we're definitely leaning into, okay, how can we be more focused on making sure that you all have what you need during this, I guess, kind of next phase of Adalo is really important for us. So I do agree. It's like you're asking, like, well, which one? And it's like, well, it is freelance agencies, but
a little bit of both.
Yeah, but with the caveat of like, we just feel like if you go so much onto that, then you risk, it being. We don't want it to be too difficult for, I guess, let's say non-technical people to make apps. So we still want that to be the case. So it's definitely a fine line there. And we see success in growth from both of those channels. So I think that's another thing, it's not, we see a lot of people that just start and come on and build their app, and that's great. Fantastic. If you want to do that, you should do that. If you, come on and you try to build a little bit and you're like, wait a second, oh, I could use an expert to build this for me. Oh, fantastic. I'll pay them that. Or if you never really even hear about the platform and it's just an expert that's like, hey, I can, build this app for you. For us, all three of those channels are still showing, really strong signs of growth. So it's, I know, we don't have, I know your question is like, well, what's your hard line? We don't have a hard line, just yet. We're kind of still in those three things, but trying to show more love to freelancers and agencies. I think it's another interesting thing that, we see a lot of people that start building on their own and just love to build things. And then they actually become freelancers and agencies. And they're like, whoa, this is cool. And like they grow on their own, so that's another reason why we still, like that, like interacting with everybody, because then they actually, right now it's like seriously like the best time to create this, if you truly believe in the vision of no code that we're all talking about, where 10 years from now, every organization will be like, well, yeah, of course we have custom apps. What am I doing? Just like they said, back in the website in 2000, right? So if you have that vision and that conviction, then it's like the best time to create a freelancing agency business, and those types of things, because there just are inherently going to be businesses that and organizations that just don't want to take the time. Even if they could do it on their own, they still, are going to want to hire people. So it's a little bit of for us kind of being in both parties, similar to what Squarespace does for websites today, what Webflow does, for businesses today, where you can either make it on their own or you can work with an agency. So I don't know. I don't think you have to pick just one, I guess I would say.
Okay. Do you think that no code will stay in the SMB space, or will it grow into the enterprise level as well?
Oh, I definitely think it'll grow into the enterprise level. I think right now in the enterprise space is primarily the established low code players. So these are like the Appians, Mendex, OutSystems, of the world.
But this new wave of no code platforms like Adalo, what needs to happen for enterprise clients to adopt them? Do you think that there'll be like major acquisitions in the space, just like AppGyver and a few other ones, like smaller, I don't want to say smaller, but let's say the Adalos of the world out there are bought by a very large enterprise, and then that becomes a shortcut for that enterprise software company to bring no code into their enterprise clients? Or do you think that the platforms with time will eventually become robust and secure and pass all those compliance processes with enterprise and get there?
I'm not trying to cop out, but I do think it'll be a mix of both. I think it'll be, I think there'll be some no-code platforms that, are really big and, enterprises are, using to do their things. I think there probably are some that, would get acquired or now be a quicker way for some of those more larger established companies to kind of, have that for their current set of enterprise customers. I think it will be a mix of both probably, but I do think there will be, some one or two no code app builders that, are huge and are used by, businesses of all sizes, all the way up to, the large enterprise. Someone on the marketing team is like, oh, I want to make a little custom app. Here I go. And then, at someone on a marketing team that's like, a massive company. I think that will happen for.
So other than time, I mean, you mentioned several times that we're still early. So other than time for no code to become mainstream, what is lacking in the space? And I'm not talking about specifics, maybe more generic. Like, what do you think is lacking in the space in order for no code to become like really mainstream? Obviously, other than interest from SMBs into no code and obviously marketing and content and all of that, but in terms of the platforms, what is lacking for that gap to be shorter?
Yeah, let's see. Well, there's certainly, like I was talking about that number of features before, I think just like all platforms are just, desperately trying to make sure you come out with the features, and you're trying to do that to your target persona. So whether that means you're coming out with them, but they're still easy enough to use, and that's challenging, right? So there's a number of I think, features there that, will just make the whole building process, easier, as well as like actually create like, so there's a lot of things you can do today. It's just like trickier. They're like little hacky workarounds in all the platforms, right?
Okay.
Making those much more simple. I think having the databases be connected easily between, again, you can do a lot of these things today in the platforms, but in more difficult ways than somebody who's less technically savvy could do. You're just talking about like a one-click integration, and it's done type of thing, right? I think that will be helpful for wherever that data exists from those different businesses. There's certainly a number of just like infrastructure requirements that, I think you're talking about enterprise for that they'll kind of want as those platforms are, scaling, where they want to put, they being, larger enterprises, have requirements, exact requirements, where, no, we use Microsoft Cloud. So we have to be in this cloud and we have to be done in this exact way. And it's like, well, whatever, wherever other platforms, like, no, well, sorry, we, our thing's over here. So, that type of situation and flexibility, I think, kind of, so there's a certain number of infrastructure improvements and feature improvements. And then there's that education improvement that I think will warrant the demand, where the customer, if you will understand enough, I should just make an app for that type of thing. So, I think it's a combination between more features, infrastructure, and improvements in flexibility, as well as that, whatever you want to call it, educational piece for the world, for it to, really kind of take off.
Right. David, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure having you.
Yeah, it was really good chatting. Thanks for having me. I've always said from the beginning, I just really desperately want this whole no code, or if you want to create something new, I just want you to be able to do it and push this whole movement forward. So wherever you're doing that, from whatever platform that you enjoy, go for it. And I'm supportive of just moving this whole mission forward in any way, whatever you're trying to solve, doing it in a way that doesn't require you to, learn years and years of technical, skill set to make what you want to make. So yeah, that's excited to have everyone listen. Thanks for listening to me ramble for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. And then these will be launched next year. So check out Adalo's website. Probably they've already launched version 2.0. That'll be fun to try out.
Cool. Sounds great.
Thank you. Bye.